more real than what we see. So now, do this and help us to believe it. And we ask of this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So yes, we are in our series, Just Jesus. And we've already looked at John chapter 2 and saw that Jesus is the true bridegroom, right? Jesus is the Lord of the feast who came to bring abundant joy into our lives. And then last week we saw from Matthew 8 that Jesus is ready. He's willing and He's able to heal and cleanse us of our sickness. Now our text today, it's a fun one because it fits in the genre of a horror film, okay? Now I've told you all this before, but I want to reiterate it again. Your view of sin and your view of Jesus will rise or fall proportionately. Okay, they're not disproportionate. They go together. There's no way around this. If you think your sin is not that bad, then who Jesus is and what He's done is not that great. But if your sin really is that bad, then who Jesus is and what He has done is really that great. So our text this morning, it's meant to cause us to see just how bad things really are, so that we would see just how great Jesus really is. I'm going to have you stand. We're going to look at Mark 5, 1 through 20. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And this is in the imperfect tense, so this means he's saying this over and over to the spirit. And then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now, a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. And they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it to the city and in the country, and people came to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but he said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. This is the word of the Lord. All right, you may take your seats. Praise, we're going to jump in. Now, when I first read this, I could not help but put myself in the disciples' shoes here, especially because of the context. They had just experienced an incredible storm before they arrived and met this demoniac, okay? They are caught right in the middle of a horror flick here. So let me give you some of the lay of the land and the context to build this story up. The Sea of Galilee is obviously in northern Israel, and it divides two worlds. Okay? On the western side, you have the Jewish, the religious people. And there's smooth slopes, gentle slopes that lead into the Sea of Galilee. On the eastern side, however, you have the irreligious Gentiles. And there's more rocks, there's more cliffs, there's more crags on the eastern side. So normally in a sailboat, it would take about 2 hours to get from one side of the lake to the other. And the context here is that Jesus had just got done finishing teaching in parables in chapter 4 to the religious western side. And then in verse 35 of chapter 4, when it was early evening, Jesus says to his disciples, "Come, let us go to the other side." So it's probably around dusk when they are on the middle of the lake and this huge windstorm, right? The Aramaic word is sharkia. This huge windstorm hits. And Mark describes it as such, as if the waves are pulling the boat under the water. So water is filling the boat and they are about to drown. And the disciples are freaking out and they're scared to death while Jesus is asleep and all this is happening. So they wake Jesus up and they say, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?" And then Jesus awakes and he rebukes the waves. He rebukes the wind. And there's this dead calm. Now, rather than making the disciples have more faith in Jesus' love and care for them after this event actually terrified them even more because they realized they're in the presence of someone who is more uncontrollable than the storm. So, fresh off of surviving that storm, where the waves almost filled the boat and caused them to drown, and then being even more terrified of the one who controls the wind and the waves, can you imagine what they were thinking and feeling for the next hour before they got to the other side? And then when they get close to the other side with the moon shining down, they see the cliffs. And then they hear this loud, strange, howling sound coming from the tombs where there are dead people. And as the boat is approaching shore, they begin to see the source of the noise. And what do they see? They see a crazy man running along the shore, howling at the top of his lungs, coming at them. And look at verse 2. Jesus is the only one who gets out of the boat to meet him. There's no mention of the disciples getting out of the boat. And can you see why? I mean, it's dark, and you got Jason from Friday the 13th coming towards you, right? Holy cow, this guy is howling like a wild animal. He is naked. He is dirty. He is smelly. He is covered in blood. And he's looking for someone to torment. So the disciples got to be freaking out at this point. I mean, I didn't sign up for this. Okay, I'm out of here. But they got nowhere to go. I mean, the first they hit this terrifying storm, and then now at night a crazy man is coming at them, yelling at the top of his lungs, looking to torment them. Now, this is not just a horror flick for the disciples, however. This is a horror flick for the religious people on the western side, okay? See, Jesus is where? He is now on the eastern side in unclean Gentile territory. And who is the first person he meets? A man possessed with unclean spirits. And where does he live? In unclean tombs. See, Jewish law rendered anybody who came in contact with a dead body to be unclean. And in Numbers 19, it tells us that if anyone failed to purify themselves from the pollution of the tombs, that they must be cut off from Israel. But what else is unclean in this scene? They're pigs. Pigs are the most unclean animals, and there's a whole herd of them. We're told around 2,000 of them. And then this is very interesting. One commentator pointed this out. I did not know. The wild boar was the symbolic emblem for the Roman legion in Palestine. This is why some scholars believe that these pigs were the food supply for Rome's soldiers who are occupying Palestine. Now, to show how shocking this is to Jewish people, one commentator put it this way. He said, Jesus meets a man with an unclean spirit, living among unclean tombs, surrounded by people who are employed in unclean occupations, all in the unclean Gentile territory. But this is not just a horror flick to the disciples and to the religious people. This man is a horror to the irreligious people as well. Look at verses 3 through 5. He has been outcasted by his own people. They put chains on him to restrain him from harming anybody. And then when that didn't work, he's banished to live all alone amongst the tombs with dead people. Nobody had the strength to subdue him. He's crying out day and night amongst the tombs and in the cliffs and the mountains, and he's cutting himself every day with stones. So in this horror flick, what do we see? We see that this man is a danger to himself. This man is a danger to others. And nobody wants anything to do with him except Jesus. Jesus is the only one who goes out to meet him. And the question is why? Why does Jesus go from the western side to the eastern side to meet this demon-possessed man? Well, remember in chapter 4, verse 35, Jesus is the one who said, "Come, let us go to the other side." So Jesus is the one orchestrating this. But what is his purpose for this trip? See, this is interesting because driving out demons is commonplace in Mark's gospel so far. In chapter 1, we have this short little paragraph that tells about how many people, bunches of people, Jesus drove demons out of. So that's commonplace in Mark's gospel so far. So why does he devote so much detail and so much space to this story? Now, I'm going to answer that question because the answer is the point of the story. I'm going to give it to you and then I'm going to prove it, okay? The point of this story is to show us just how bad the human condition really is. What do we see? We see sin's enslaving power. What else do we see? We see how we cannot free ourselves from it. And what else do we see? It shows us sin's goal. And what is it? To distort the image of God and to destroy us. In other words, the human condition apart from God is really as bad as this demon-possessed man. And, I believe that some of you may not see it that way, and that's okay, but here are two things I want you to consider. First, this is the second longest story that Mark tells in his gospel. You know what the longest story is? Jesus' passion in chapters 14 and 15. So this narrative, it's central to Mark's gospel. This narrative is one of the most important stories that Mark tells. Mark wants us to see sin's enslaving power and goal so we see our need for Jesus' passion. But if that doesn't do it for you, maybe this second thing will. Mark's putting together three scenes here. The three scenes that he's putting together is going to summarize Jesus' mission. What are the three scenes? Well, the calming of the storm in chapter 4. Our text right now, and Jesus' power over this legion of demons possessing this man. And then the rest of chapter 5 is going to deal with Jesus raising Jairus' dead daughter back to life. So what are we seeing when these three pictures are put together? We have the calming of the storm, where Jesus' love and care for us is as the better Jonah. The better Jonah who sacrifices his life in order to save others. And then what do we see with him confronting this demon-possessed man? Only Jesus has the power to break and to free us from sin's slavery. Well, what does raising Jairus' daughter from the dead tell us? It tells us the result of Jesus' sacrifice, that we too will be raised to newness of life. Now, we're going to look at the story of Jairus in, I think, 4 weeks or so. So I'm going to hold on to that one, but this is it. These three scenes serve as a summary of Jesus' mission. So there's more going on here than a mere demon possession and exorcism, okay? Mark wants us to see how bad our condition really is so that we can see just how great Jesus' mercy really is. See, look at the nature of this conflict in verses 6 through 9. Earlier in chapter 1, one of the things we discover is that when a demon names Jesus, it's an attempt to try to control Jesus, okay? So when this demoniac is running towards the boat, he doesn't know it's Jesus yet. But then when he just thinks he's coming to torment more people. But when he sees that it's Jesus, what happens? He falls down before him. He cries out in a loud voice, "What do I have to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, as God, do not torment me." For Jesus was saying, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Now, this is a very interesting interchange that is filled with irony here, okay? Because this conflict is one of control and power. Right? He's trying to exercise control over Jesus by naming him. But look at the title he gives Jesus. This is not a messianic title. This is a title that displays his deity and his power. Son of the Most High God, which means he has no rival. So this demon falls before Jesus as an inferior. Okay? He's acknowledging we have nothing in common. He calls Jesus the Son of the Most High God, and yet he tries to control Jesus while acknowledging he's powerless to. So there's a strange mixture of this demon imploring Jesus, but also helplessly pleading with Jesus. So what's really going on here? What's the point? The demon is already defeated before the conflict even begins. But what does he still try to do? He still tries to fight, even though he knows he can't win. And then in verse 9, what do we find out? We find out it's not just one demon, but a whole bunch of them. When Jesus asks, "What's your name?" the response is "Legion, for we are many." Now, the Greek term legion is the military term borrowed from Latin, legio. A legio designated the largest troop in the Roman army, around 5,600 men. So we don't know if he had 5,600 demons occupying him or possessing him. We don't know that, but it's a great number. So what do we see? Not only do we see that these demons are a hostile force, but we also see that they're organized and they're bent on conquering and destroying what God had created. In other words, I would say it this way: sin has a purpose. Sin is like legion. It's a powerful force that seeks to control everything in its path. And then when legion drowns the 2,000 pigs, do we not see that its ultimate purpose is to destroy what God has created? You see, the ultimate goal of sin is what? Is to destroy us. And we need to be in our right frame of mind to see this. Sin is not a friend. Sin is a powerful force bent on controlling, enslaving, and destroying you. Look at sin's enslaving power in verses 3 through 5. Again, he lived among the tombs. He's a dead man, surrounded by death. No one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he broke and he shattered the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Now, one commentator said this. He says, this is one of the most lamentable stories of human wretchedness in the Bible. Mark's description is more fitting of a ferocious animal than of a human being. He's a terror to himself and a terror to others. The evil forces that torment the man among the tombs equal and parallel the violent tempest that beset the boat on the lake in the previous scene. How bad is the human condition? We are not as free as we think we are. We are all in spiritual bondage to a legion of sin. See, sin controls us like Legion is controlling this man. And here's the question. Are you in the right frame of mind to see how powerless you are against it? Are you in the right frame of mind to know that you do not have the strength to subdue it? Are you in the right frame of mind to know and to realize that nothing can constrain sin? We can try. We can enlist the help of others to help us to try to contain it and to restrain it. But sin is too powerful to be controlled by any human being. So in Mark 5, we get a picture of sin's power and control over us. But if I was to state it propositionally, I would say what Paul says in our scripture reading from Romans 3, verses 9 through 18. For we have already charged that all, both Jew and Greek, that's everybody, that's every human being, all are under sin, which means all are under the influence. All are under the control of. All are under sin's power. As it is written. Now he's going to quote a bunch of Psalms here. There is no one righteous. Oh, and just in case you don't believe me, no, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. In fact, what have all done? All have turned aside. You know what that means? It means when we turn aside from God, we're turning towards something else. We have all turned away from God and have turned towards something else to give us what we think God can't. So we have all turned aside, and what has that produced? What has it caused? Together they have become worthless. There is no one who does good. Oh, just in case you didn't hear me or believe me. No, not even one. Their throat, notice the body parts that he's going to focus on. First, he's going to start with descriptions of the head, okay? Their throat is an open grave. What does that mean? It means your soul and your heart are spiritually dead, and all your voice is doing is echoing what's true inside. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is on their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Their feet, from head to toe. Their feet are swift to shed blood, and their paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace they have not known. There's no fear of God before their eyes. What's Paul saying? From head to toe, this is true of every human being. No one is excluded from this description. This is true of every human being. We have all turned aside from God to look for something other than God to give us what we think God can't. And when we do, whatever we look to controls us, rules us. And when we are ruled by something other than God, what happens? His image gets distorted in us. We become less than human. So one way to think of it is sin is a decreation. And I want you to see how this works, okay? When we turn aside from following what God thinks and become more concerned about what others think, when what they think is more important than what God thinks, what's happening? What they think is now ruling you. What they think is now controlling you. What they think is now determining how you live. So you may think you are free, but you are really controlled by others. You are controlled by other people's encouragement and their criticism. You're controlled by other people's approval and their disapproval. You're controlled by their acceptance or their rejection. See, when we are ruled by what others think, instead of reflecting God by living for the good of others, we become consumed with ourselves. When you are consumed and only concerned about yourself, it makes you live more like an animal than as a human being created in the image of God. How? Well, you're not only a harm to yourself, but you're a harm to others. How does that work? Well, if somebody doesn't give you what you want, how do you view them? How do you treat them? Do you view them as a brother or sister? Or do you view and treat them as an enemy? Sin is a decreation. Sin is an undoing of what God has made. Sin is an undoing of the way things ought to be. Just like this man, when we are controlled by sin, we live more like an animal because instead of seeking the good of others, we seek harm to others. And we may not literally cut ourselves, although some people do. But do we not cut ourselves with punishment every time we fail? Do we not cut ourselves with self-hatred, self-condemnation, self-loathing, self-blaming? And then do we not cut others for the way they fail us and don't meet our expectations? We lash out at people. We try to prove our dominance over people. We do this by belittling them or devouring them. How bad is it? Sin does not just seek to distort God's image to make us act less than human, but sin seeks to destroy us. And we are powerless to free ourselves from it. See, the most telling verse is what? Verse 4. No one had the strength to subdue him. Sin is so powerful that nobody and nothing can subdue it except Jesus. See, this is the point of the story, isn't it? Mark wants us to see how bad the human condition really is so that we can see just how great Jesus' mercy really is. See, did this man deserve this? Did this man do something that caused Jesus to think, hey, I'm going to go all the way over to the other side because this man is worthy and deserves my deliverance. No, Jesus goes over to the other side because this man needed rescue. A man so oppressed by demons that Jesus was willing to leave the comfort of the western side to enter into this man's torment in order to free him from his spiritual bondage and to send what was enslaving him into the sea. And I want you to notice when the demons were cast into the sea, what happens? We're told the man was clothed. He's no longer naked. He's no longer ashamed. But you got to ask a question. Where did he get the clothes? Jesus is the only one with him. It had to be Jesus' cloak covering him, didn't it? Not only is this man clothed, but what else does Mark tell us? But he's in his right mind. He's calm. The power that calmed the natural storm in chapter 4 is Jesus' power calming the spiritual storm in this man in chapter 5. You see, in verse 2, when Jesus steps out of the boat, he's stepping out of the boat as the Son of the Most High God, which means he's the return of the true King. When Jesus steps out of the boat on the Gentile land, he's saying, this is mine, not yours. He is mine, not yours. So, when he steps onto this land, what's he also saying? This man's life is worth more to me than the economic profit of the pigs. Jesus, in other words, what's the point of this story? Jesus was willing to go to the other side to save one man. And isn't this story a preview of the power that Jesus' death on the cross would display? You see, what does he do on the cross? He becomes all of our sin, and where does he cast it? Into the sea. All of our sin he casts into the sea, which means his death is what? It's a liberating death. His death frees us from sin's bondage. How? How does his death free us from sin's bondage? Because what does his death do? It pays the debt that we owe God. And if that debt has been paid, the sentence of judgment is no longer hanging over your head. So if the sentence of judgment is removed because Jesus pays the debt, Jesus absorbs the debt, Jesus refuses to make you pay. So if that is removed, so is the fear of facing God's judgment. The fear of facing God's judgment is the bondage that sin holds everybody under. And now that it's removed, you've been set free from it. But Jesus' saving work, it involves more than just paying sin's ransom to set you free. Jesus' perfect, sinless life, in other words, it gives us the righteousness that we so desperately need. When we trust in Jesus' death to free us from our enslavement to sin, what happens? Jesus covers and clothes us with his cloak of righteousness. So when we are cloaked and covered and clothed with Jesus' righteousness, you have all of the affirmation you need. Because what does that mean? When we are clothed in the cloak of Jesus' righteousness, we are declared to be right with God. We are declared to be righteous, which means the way God views and treats you is the same way He views and treats His Son, which means we're justified. We're affirmed. We are embraced. We are deeply loved and welcomed as God's sons and daughters. Which means what? It means this. I'll say it in a catchy way so you might remember. The cross and Jesus' clothes are the only thing that can restore God's image in you. The cross and Jesus' clothes are the only thing that can produce the great calm, the calming of your soul. But did you notice how the locals responded to Jesus after He restores God's image in this man, clothes him so that he's in his right frame of mind? What do? They beg Jesus to leave. They begged Jesus to leave when they should have been begging Jesus to heal them. To heal them from the way they're being controlled by money. You see, they just lost their prophet when the pigs went into the sea. And now they want nothing to do with Jesus. In other words, they care more about money than they do about this man. So who's acting like the animal now? Who are the ones who are really chained and in bondage? Now, for some of you, you are like the locals. You still don't see how in bondage to sin you really are. If this is you, ask Jesus to show you the things that are controlling you. Ask Him to show you where you care more about other things than you do Him, where you care more about other things than you do other people. And then ask Him to be merciful to you. Ask Him to heal you. Ask Him to cleanse you. You see, Jesus values this man's life, and He values your life, even if you don't value His. Which means there is more mercy in Jesus than there is sin in you. And then to my Christian friends who think sin is a friend, do you not see sin's nature rightly in this passage? That sin's purpose is what? It's to destroy you. Because it hates you. And it hates Jesus. Sin wants to distort God's image in you. It wants to make you consumed with self. Sin, in other words, it wants you to live for self. It wants you to trust in self. It wants you to become consumed with satisfying self. Why? Because it wants to control and destroy you. Or I could say it this way: sin wants you to cozy up to it so that you no longer want to be near Jesus. If this is you, cry out to Jesus right now. Jesus, help me to see sin's nature rightly. Help me to see that it actually seeks to destroy me and destroy others. Help me to desire you more than it. In other words, Jesus, help me to stop loving it by loving you more. In other words, cry out and say, Jesus, calm the storm that's raging in my soul right now. And then lastly, there are those of you who feel outcasted by God because you still struggle with sin. And you worry that Jesus is going to stay on the other side and he's not going to come for you. Do you not see how Jesus went to the other side for one man to be merciful to? And do you not see how Jesus already cast your sin into the sea? Do you not see how he's already clothed you with his righteousness? So, what is it? Yes, sin still influences. Okay? But Jesus will never let it dominate and ultimately destroy you. In other words, you have been freed from its bondage and judgment at the cross, but you need to be in the right frame of mind to understand something. The normal, hear me, the normal Christian life is a life of struggling with sin. It is not the absence of that struggle. But here's something else. When you feel like sin is dominating you, what do? Cry out to Jesus for help. Ask him to strengthen you. Ask him to change your desires. Ask him to help you to fight against sin's influence. But lastly, and I end with this, you need to be in the right frame of mind here. When you do give in to sin's desires, do not flee from Jesus. Return to Jesus. You can always return to Jesus. Why? Because he still forgives you. He still welcomes you. He still loves you. He still embraces you. He will take you back and receive you with open arms. The cross and Jesus' clothes are the only thing that can restore God's image in us and bring about the great calm. And once our souls are calmed, may we go home and tell our family, tell our friends all the things that Jesus has done for us and how great his mercy really is. Amen.